Good evening. This is Maestro Cotella with a Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Calderis Refinery. Our first player today is Storm of Steel, playing as the Orc Warboss, this big, stompy, tanky melee hero who is very tanky, walks right through cover. He can disrupt with his stomp. He can get some really heavy armor and make him really ridiculously tanky. Pretty good hero overall. And Storm of Steel's opponent is none other than the Kvek. To distinguish him from all the other Kveks out there, Kvek is playing as the Eldar Warlock. The Eldar Warlock is a melee hero, and depending on how you choose to upgrade him, he can serve many different roles. He can be a tanky melee hero in a very simple way, or he can have a more interesting build with that makes him more like a sorcerer type thing, a manipulation hero, and spellcasting hero. So there have been a few comments on my channel in fairly recent weeks about casting and commentary style, and especially some complaints as well as some words of praise. And there are times when I do choose to actually analyze things a little more, and sometimes that means not commenting on every single thing that that's actually happening on the screen. Not simply just saying what's happening, but trying to explain things, sometimes taking a little more time to go into detail. It's something I like to do. It's something I've liked in certain other casting channels that I really enjoy, like Inverse TV and the Frontline Network, although those are Company of Heroes casting channels. And it's also something that I think there isn't as much of as far as Dawn of War 2 casting goes. So in a matchup like this, we have the Orc Warboss against the Eldar. The Warboss is a very, very proven hero in Dawn of War 2. Certainly in the Retribution era, I can't speak much for before that, but the Warboss is tournament proven in 1v1. I think he's a very good 1v1 hero. Of course, he's proven in part because he was represented by a player like Holy Hammer, but I still feel that even disregarding that, he's a very good 1v1 hero. I think one of the things that has to do with is that he is a tanky melee hero. Tanky melee heroes often, I think, usually have advantages early on, since they often require more than one unit to deal with. Usually the only unit that can efficiently deal with a tanky melee hero in Tier 1 is a suppression team, since that's the only unit that can usually take care of a tanky melee hero by itself. The only other kind of unit that can take care of a tanky melee hero by itself is another tanky melee hero. So it can often force inefficient plays from your opponent, especially if they are not playing a tanky melee hero. And I think the Orcs are pretty good at following up and supporting their Warboss. I think the Warboss is not just good in his own right, but I feel he has good synergy with the rest of his army. And I almost feel like he has better synergy with the rest of his army than many of the other tanky melee heroes, especially early on, in part because the Orc opening is a high DPS opening, and that's high DPS coming out from pretty much all of their Tier 1 units, or mainly the Shooter Boys, the Slugger Boys, the Storm Boys. I guess not so much the Luda, but they serve a very different purpose. And part of what happens is, if the Warboss is distracting more than one unit, that's multiple enemy units that are not firing on the Orc squads. And the Orc squads will be able to inflict losses very quickly because they are high DPS squads. In particular, Shooter Boys with big shooters, as well as with if they also choose to get the Knob Leader, will very, very quickly bleed models off of something like these Dire Avengers, which both do less damage and cost more to reinforce their models. In particular, these Dire Avengers, they're good in a lot of ways. They scale better than most other Tier 1 range squads. They have a lot of versatility and utility with their grenades, as well as their energy shields and fleet of foot. I think some of the weaknesses of the Dire Avengers is that they are pretty much probably the least cost-effective of the infantry armor squads in Tier 1. And that's a little debatable, but certainly what we can say is that they have probably have the highest reinforcement cost for infantry-based squads, at least relative to how much health they have in comparison to how much health other similar infantry squads such as Shooter Boys have. And how much they cost, of course, to reinforce. So, like, you really don't want to lose models on Dire Avengers pretty much if you can help it. Now, Kvek has very interestingly chosen not to upgrade his Dire Avengers with the battle equipment. Now, by doing that, first of all, on the one hand, he's making his Dire Avengers a little more susceptible to bleed, because they will be losing their models more easily by not having the health upgrade that comes from having that aspect rather than battle equipment, the Dire Avenger aspect. He's also not getting that grenade, he's not getting that fleet of foot, so he's not going to have the map control that he could potentially have with the Dire Avenger aspect. He's also lacking the potential for grenade spikes on retreat, which means he won't be inflicting as much bleed, and doesn't have quite that potential for squad wipes the way he would if he did have them. There we do see we do see an aspect on one of them, and I guess what he chose to do is that he actually chose to get these aspects while he was upgrading to Tier 2, as opposed to getting them before upgrading to Tier 2. And what's smart about that is the fact that it allows him to get to Tier 2 faster, because he's not spending that power on getting the aspects early. And then he can actually have the aspect upgrade run concurrently with the Tier 2 upgrade. So he'll be upgrading to Tier 2 and getting the aspects at the same time, instead of delaying his Tier 2 in order to get the aspects, which I think is pretty smart. Although it does still mean that he's getting the aspects later than he otherwise would. We already, and that early Tier 2, already have the Warp Throw and already wiped a Shooter Boy squad out of that. So a big play from Kvek right there. Getting one of those Shooter Boy squads wiped already, courtesy of that Warp Throw. The Warp Throw is, of course, a signature ability of the Warlock. There has been some talk lately on the forums of it being overpowered and in need of change. It's certainly an ability that has, for a while, been something that's been very, very powerful. Now, by getting this ability, you are requiring the Warlock to use energy in order to use the spell. You're also foregoing the Heart of Darkness accessory, so you're probably not going to go for the Jedi build if you want the Warp Throw. So you're going for more of a spell casting and support Warlock rather than the aggressive, tanky Warlock. Looks like we might even have some Slugger Boys wiped right here, almost unnecessarily. Really just needed an earlier retreat there. Goes for a grenade spike, but I think this Slugger has so little health that if he just shoots at it like he does right there, he'll take it out. And we already have 2 squad wipes. Kvek wiped 2 of Storm of Steel's early squads. Now, Kvek is clearly on the winning end of engagements at this point, wiping 2 squads. That being said, Storm of Steel has been doing a bit better on the map control. For a time, the map was mostly blue. He doesn't actually seem to be doing that much better economically, or even if he's doing better. I'm not even sure if he's necessarily doing better economically, but he definitely had. He still probably had better map control. He definitely had better VP control, and he was winning on VPs, although it looks like he might lose his Warboss right here. Wow, and a precision grenade throw going for the Warboss. Usually hard to target a single entity just with that. Just with the grenades. But I guess part of what Kvek did was that he really went a very, very light... went very, very light on power in Tier 1. I think his only power expenditure in Tier 1 was the Shuriken weapon team. He did not get an aspect on the Dire Avengers in Tier 1. He got them after upgrading to Tier 2, or while Tier 2 was upgrading. And he's not getting his aspect for his Howling Banshees until now. So he really rushed to Tier 2. And he's choosing not to rush a vehicle with it, but I'd say he's in a very strong position with both having Warp Throw as well as having some pretty fast Warp Spiders out on the field as well. And these Warp Spiders, I think, are a great choice. I often say that I think the Warp Spiders are a very safe choice for Eldar because of how many different functions they serve and how good they are overall. One of the obvious things is that they are the only... They're the only snare that Eldar, the only vehicle snare that Eldar has, except for the Eldritch Storm, and you can't rely on a Tier 3 nuke for your snaring. especially not for something like just like this war truck right here. So we have the warp spiders, and then of course there's the fact that they do a huge amount of range damage. I'm actually not as much of a numbers person as I used to be, but going by memory, I believe that the damage of a warp spider squad with both their Exarch as well as the aspect of the warp spider is greater than the damage of 2 Dire Avenger squads. So you're getting a huge amount of ranged DPS out of 1 squad. I believe it's actually better than Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines, although Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines do have a better damage type. And then, of course, you're also getting a teleporting squad. So, oh, could this be another squad wipe? Certainly potential with maybe a grenade. Howling Banshees, of course, chasing. But back to those warp spiders, you're getting a teleporting squad, so you're potentially getting map control. They should generally be in cover since you can control where they are, and the warp spiders also can act as setup team counters. So we now have some Storm Boys out for Storm of Steel. Storm Boys coming out in Tier 2, immediately fully upgrading them. They have both their knobs as well as the improved rocket packs. That's an interesting choice. He will be able. That does allow him to jump this Shuriken weapon team, and he may also be overloading Kvek on melee units. Kvek is actually somewhat lacking in melee counters. He basically has this Howling Banshees, and the interesting thing about the way Eldar works is that typically in Tier 1 they don't counter melee. In Tier 1 they just have the best melee in the form of the Howling Banshees. So it's usually not that they're worried about countering melee, they just have the best melee unit, and it's basically on the other races to counter them. That being said, with two big melee units out for Storm of Steel, we have both the Slugga Boys and the Storm Boys out with their knobs. At this point, the Howling Banshees may not entirely be enough. Kvek might want to consider, he got the Merciless Witchblade, which is a very good answer for the Warboss, but he may also want to consider the Witchblade of Kurnos. Although, as long as Storm of Steel is sending in the Slugga Boys in here and absolutely getting them murdered, might even lose the whole thing. Probably won't lose the Slugga Knob. But as long as he's just sending both of the Orc squads in by themselves without either... wow, and he did take out the Slugga Knob. My god, those Howling Banshees. Almost to level 3. But I think Storm of Steel really would have wanted either to have both of his melee squads to fight the Howling Banshees, or he would want the War Truck support to reinforce them as they're losing models. Which would, of course, be expensive, but I think it would still give the win to the Orc melee squads instead of the Howling Banshees. So, Storm of Steel certainly starting to respect those Howling Banshees. They are such a devastating unit, and he decides to get the Cyborg implants on his Warboss, upgrades the regular Stomp to the Big Stomp, increasing its damage by 20 and also allowing it to stun. Although it does give it improved wind-up time. Now, Kvek, let's see, Storm of Steel had the early map control and he still has the VP lead, but it's about to be a triple cap in favor of Kvek, and he's made some very interesting and I'd say pretty effective choices. He went with that very light Tier 1, and I think he chose his engagements well and was very evasive with his non-aspect Dire Avengers. And he lost map control in Tier 1. I think a lot of that having to do with how oppressive the Warlock can be. But he's definitely making it up right now. He's obviously got the better map control. He's about to have most of the map. And he's definitely been on the much better end of unit wipes. In fact, Kvek has killed 3 squads. He's killed 3 squads. He's killed 2 Slugga Boy squads. No, yeah, 2 Slugga Boy squads, as well as 1 Shooter Boy squad. And we also have very quick, I feel like very quick Tier 3s out of these players right now. With both players, well, Storm of Steel chose to get a Tier 1 unit in Tier 2, as well as a Tier 2 unit. He got the Stick Bomb. And Stick Bombs are relatively cheap. But still, they're actually still a unit with a very nice potential payoff. Looks like we got a grenade going down right there on the Shooter Boys. They are going to get back inside. And these stick bombs right here are actually doing nothing. But one of the challenges that Storm of Steel is going to have right now is actually the fact that he does not have any Sluggaboys to repair his war truck. So we might be able to expect this war truck to go down pretty soon, unless he gets some new Sluggos to repair it. It might even go down from a Haywire Grenade. And again, we see yet another squad wipe. Now, this is not a matchup that I play a whole lot. I used to, or at least I used to play Eldar a little bit, but never much of an orc person myself. And we see that these Storm Boys getting shredded even with using Use Your Choppas. And oh man, I mean, that was a very close call right there. He could have lost the Storm Boy knob, and with the entire squad along to this Warlock. And we have Kvek decides to get as his first choice a Fire Prism, which I think is a very, very smart choice. Now, he's probably... Whoa, there goes the war shot. He's probably he might be expecting to have a tech advantage over Storm of Steel. He might be expecting... I don't know, but he could reasonably expect to have a tech advantage just because he's killed so many of Storm of Steel's squads, and then Storm of Steel, if he were going to replace those squads... oh, wow. If Storm of Steel were going to replace those squads, that could potentially delay his Tier 3 tech if he wanted to replace many of his existing squads with other Tier 1 or Tier 2 squads. Now, Storm of Steel has chosen not to do that. He went all the way to Tier 3, which is potentially a little risky, since he's going to Tier 3 with having lost most of his army. And he's not going to have much of an army at this point. But he's saving up resources, and I'm not sure what he's saving for. I would think he would get knobs, although he's obviously not choosing to do that. But this Fire Prism, I think, is a good choice for very many reasons. First of all, Storm of Steel hardly has any squads, so whatever squads he even does have around is going to get blasted by that Fire Prism. It's definitely very, very hard to fight a Fire Prism if you are on the losing end of like army size and army composition, because the Fire Prism is kind of pretty effectively going to disable one of your units from long range, and you almost have to not even consider that unit. I mean, not quite, but you have to do something about the Fire Prism before the squad that's getting targeted by the Fire Prism can actually do something. And Storm of Steel doesn't have many squads that he can just let get disrupted by a Fire Prism. And of course, even his Warboss can, of course, get disrupted by the Fire Prism. And if we had, like, Storm of Steel was actually going for the knobs, and he actually canceled the knobs. The knobs would... Oh, and Kvek is actually going to lose that Fire Prism already. But the knobs, one of the chief counters to knobs for Eldar is the Fire Prism, because it's constant disruption and constantly disrupts them. Now, that was very sad for Kvek that he just lost this Fire Prism right here. I think it would have been better for him to back up rather than try to go through the front of that rocks. And he may have tried that. There may have been some confusion with micro and pathing. But he lost the Fire Prism out of that. I feel like unnecessarily. May have been some micro and pathing difficulties. But Kvek is still exerting an enormous amount of pressure. But luckily for Storm of Steel, I'd say this Battle Wagon is probably a good choice. Now, it's tough to say that, like, just getting a super unit with almost no units to support the super unit is going to be a good choice. But it's... First of all, it was something that would actually... would not have to fear that Fire Prism a whole lot if the Fire Prism was actually still alive. Of course, the Fire Prism is no longer alive, but it wouldn't have to fear the Fire Prism that much. It would certainly get plinked a bit at long range, but it could at least tank the damage a little bit. As it is, with the Fire Prism gone, there actually really isn't a whole lot for Kvek to actually counter this Battle Wagon. And Kvek still has the resources to get some kind of new unit out on the field, but he still does not actually have something right now to deal with this Fire Prism. So as long as he doesn't have something, wherever the Battle Wagon is going to be, that's basically just going to be territory that Storm of Steel is going to own, because again, Kvek right now cannot fight this Battle Wagon. He can stall it a bit with some haywire grenades, and that looks like what he's going to do. But if he doesn't have anything to follow it up, it's not really going to do much. Although Storm of Steel is going to need to get Slugga Boys to repair this battle wagon. I don't think you would want to have something like this out on the field without having units to repair it. You really definitely something like a battle wagon you don't want to just throw away. So I'm a little concerned about the Weird Boy choice. The Weird Boy is of course a fantastic unit, but I feel like it is very important for Storm of Steel to get Slugga Boys very, very soon. And he has, of course, been having trouble keeping the Slugga Boys alive. He lost 2 of them already. But that, all the more reason to keep them inside the battle wagon. They can be the unit to be inside the battle wagon, since you need at least 1 squad in the battle wagon to fully activate it, as opposed to retail where you needed 4 squads. But if he got Slugga Boys and he put them in there, he would have his repair support in there, as well as getting the battle wagon to do everything that it needs to do. So Storm of Steel is definitely in a tough position. He needs to be, again, be very prudent with his next unit purchases. And it is a shame that his next unit purchase probably should be the Slugga Boys. Because the Slugga Boys would mostly get purchased to support this battle wagon. And there are probably other units that he could use, that he could probably get more benefit out of. And the Weird Boy already goes down? I guess there is a ton of range fire, and this is not a good situation. Actually, it's not that bad, because I don't think this is going to be enough to actually take out the battle wagon. If Kvek still had the Wraith Guard out on the field, that would probably be the end of the battle wagon. The battle wagon also pretty much forces a Brightlands purchase on that Shuriken cannon, which does remove the Shuriken, and that gives the Warboss a lot more free reign, since the Warboss is much more easily just going to be able to walk right into the Eldar blob. Although there is certainly a ton of other range fire coming out from the rest of Storm of Steel's units. And Storm of Steel actually really overextending this battle wagon and might even lose it. Oh, but Kvek is trying a little too hard with his Warp Spiders and actually loses the Warp Spiders, and I think this engagement will actually go in Storm of Steel's favor. But Storm of Steel is actually running out of time on the VPs. But, one of the things that Storm of Steel is not doing so well is that he's got his Slugga Boys, his boys, they're retreating because they were overextended, walking right into, basically walking right into Kvek's army when he really needs them repairing, because this battle wagon can't do much if it walks right here, if it drives into this, that was unfortunately exactly what Storm of Steel needed to not do. And now he's got 2 Slugga Boy squads. He probably got that second one to have even more repairs, and now he's not even going to be able to do anything with that. But look at the Warboss right here, chasing after this Wraith Guard, and I think he will wipe out that last model. He just needs 1 hit, and that should be the end of it. Oh, he derps a little bit, but I think he still will get that hit. Will he? Yes, he does, and there goes the Wraith Guard. And wow, look at how many units. Where did all of Kvek's units just go? And suddenly, Storm of Steel is right back in this game, except for the fact that he really needs to cap. Now, unfortunately, part of what Storm of Steel is really going to struggle with, and he just had some major victories in unit wipes that could potentially put him back in the game. But what's really screwing him up a bit is the fact that because of how few units he had, because Kvek had the earlier wipes, that meant Kvek was able to retain map control while Storm of Steel really couldn't take it back. The only point he could afford to take back was this middle VP. Now what that means is that he didn't have these side requisitions and powers right over here on both of these sides, and that's pretty much been giving Kvek quite a resource advantage. And although the players came out on the end of that last engagement having the same number of squads, the difference was that Kvek had way more resources. He's actually going for a Fire Prism when I think he could have even afforded an Avatar pretty soon. Not that an Avatar would necessarily be the best choice, but I'm just saying that to just illustrate the kind of resources that Kvek had from the advantage that he had. And if we look at his incomes, they both have the same requisition income, but Kvek with a plus 59 power, not that, well, it does matter at this point. But they're going to need both requisition and power to get some kind of major tier 3 unit. We actually have Providence on the Warlock. So he switched out the Cloak of Shadows. I don't think he even used that much. I did see him use it once. And he actually uses Warp Throw to get his Warlock out of there. And there goes the Warboss, disrupting all of those Howling Banshees. So we have Kvek's second Fire Prism out on the field. Again, I think this is a very good choice, in part because it's going to, once Kvek gets this middle VP, as long as he can get it, he probably would be very effective at deterring Storm of Steel from even capturing it again, because he has this Fire Prism. The Fire Prism is very effective as victory point denial because of the fact that it disrupts, which is one of the major advantages it has over a more traditional tank. And people sometimes compare the Fire Prism to other tier 3 vehicles, which I think is somewhat inappropriate, just because I really feel like the Fire Prism is in a different class than something like the Predator or the Lehman Russ or something like this looted tank. The looted tank, the Lehman Russ, the Predator, those are tanks. They have shorter range than the Fire Prism. Generally speaking, they don't disrupt, or at least they don't disrupt with their regular attack. And I feel they really serve a different function, and they have a lot more general utility. I actually feel like the tanks are actually generalist units, whereas this Fire Prism is really a specialist unit. And again, we're in this position right here where it's going to be very, very difficult for pretty much for Storm of Steel to get this middle VP pack as long as the Fire Prisms are alive. He's trying to force off the looted tank, force off the Warlock rather, with the looted tank, but he's not doing damage fast enough. He's going for a decap off on this top VP, but it could cost him his Shooter Boy squad, and I think it will. What he really needs is, he needs just the immediate capture on the middle VP, because he nearly lost his Shooter Boy squad, and he's going to lose the looted tank. Here's a Warp Throw, to get the Slugger Boys off, and that's just generally just another use of the Warp Throw as a way of, again, VP denial, and Eldar is a race with just a lot of ways for late game VP denial. Gives them both a lot of comeback potential, as well as the ability to really just solidify a lead once they have it. We have that third Fire Prism coming out from Kvek, and I feel like that has to be the end of the game in favor of Kvek. I really don't see actually what Storm of Steel could do about 3 Fire Prisms at this point. And it's like he can't even force this Bright Lance off the capture point because all of his units are just getting disrupted. And he's trying to go for the Fire Prisms. I think he may have actually been able to kill that Bright Lance if he had actually attacked it with his Warboss. The Warboss would probably only need 1, 2, maybe 3 hits to force off the Bright Lance right there. But that is the end of the game. Kvek, he titled this replay and just said that he basically just about Eldar being OP, and he certainly did utilize a lot of the strengths of Eldar in this game. So, at any rate, hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.